This screencast, we're going to be looking at the essay rubric that will be used in the honors class. Could also be used in an academic class, as this is really just about the format of how students will be graded. So the rubrics will potentially look the same. So the first thing we're going to start out with, looking at the top, it's telling you about the essay rubric for your first essay. So normally an essay would be an opening, 1, 2, 3 supporting paragraphs, and then a closing. So you want to pay attention in class, see what the requirements are. We could be in a situation where there is no opening, so that gets cut, and then replacing that will be a one-sentence thesis, and then you would have one supporting paragraph right here. And that supporting paragraph has to have 1, 2, and 3 sources that clearly support your thesis. So you'll notice that in the heading here, and this section says essay rubric second essay, and then the next essay here is 3 to 4 3-paragraph essay. So this is where your standard. So the goal here is that first marking period you're going to write 1 paragraph, second marking period 2, and the goal is hopefully by fourth marking period we could have a straight out 4-paragraph essay, but that will be dependent on how well students are performing in this category throughout the year. As we could see in this particular rubric for the third and fourth marking period, we have this section that is looking at your sources, and it's per paragraph. So this assumes for paragraph 1, 2, and 3 you have 3 sources, which means you need a total of 9 sources that clearly support what you're writing. Again, you want to pay attention in class to see which rubric is going to be used, and that's what we're looking at here. So let's start here with the first essay. So with the first essay, like I said, unless there are changes in the directions, we're looking at a thesis. So this opening is not going to apply. We are looking at a thesis with 3 supporting sources for your thesis. Make sure the cited sources 1, 2, and 3 clearly support the thesis. If source 3 does not support the thesis, that can be an issue. So let's take this section and let's look at this. I'm reading your essay, and I have to make a decision. Does the cited source 1 clearly support the thesis? If it does, you will get a 0. If there's clearly no connection or there's a contradiction in the thesis for your second source, you will get a 2, and that is a deduction. And then let's say there's one that's somewhere in the middle, then you would score a 1. So for this section, we see that we have a -3 deduction for sources. Then I go down to the analysis section, and now I'm looking at the cited source. So this source right here has a 0. It clearly supported the thesis, but now I'm looking at how you analyze the source. Do you correctly analyze the cited source? So now I'm looking at source number 1, and I'm looking at your analysis section here. Do you explain clearly how this cited source supports the thesis? It's just yes or no. So we go back down, looking at this section here. I have to make that decision here based on how you analyze your source. So when you're analyzing your source, you always want to answer these questions, 1 or 2 of these questions. How or why does the cited source that you cited here supports the thesis that you mentioned here? And I haven't really addressed the thesis. So let's go back to a scenario. I saw a clear connection with the source. This one I was debating, and this one was clearly off. So that'll be a deduction there. And then I'm looking at your sources. And you are scored on each source. So sometimes, in this case, the student has a clear source, but their analysis is off. This is a -2 deduction. And let's say in this source, they had a questionable source, but their analysis of that source was on point. Maybe it's the analysis is there. Student scores a 0. And for that third source that was clearly not supportive of the thesis, that source right there has some poor analysis. They're not answering these questions, how or why the cited source supports the thesis. So in this section right here, just on your sources alone, 2, 4, 6, 7, you have a -7 deduction right there. For the thesis, I want to see one sentence, and I want to see that it clearly, outlines the argument. I want you to be specific. I want you to try to lock yourself in the box. Avoid things like throughout history or many people. You want to be clear with your thesis. I think I have some samples up here. So in this section, we see the thesis arguing one point. Now, I know there's a lot of discussion about enumerated thesis. Some English teachers don't want it. I'm actually looking for that. So in this section here, we have a thesis for one supporting paragraph. This one right here is for 2 supporting paragraphs, and this is for 3. So World War I started because the assassination of Ferdinand set in motion secret treaties. So that's the thesis. It's just one point. Notice when we look at sample number 2, we have secret treaties, and then Germany's attempt to resolve the crisis politically failed. So if you are asked to write 2 supporting paragraphs, I will be looking for 3 sources on the secret treaties after the assassination of Ferdinand. That would be paragraph 1. And then I would be looking for, Germany's attempt to resolve the crisis politically failed. Then I would be looking for 3 sources to support point 2. If you're asked to write 3 paragraphs, now you would have 3 supporting points. And the third one here is that Russia mobilized her forces due to a perceived threat from Germany. Anyway, for the first essay, one supporting paragraph, we're really just looking for one issue. It's the assassination of Ferdinand. So let's go down here, this section. So the assassination of Ferdinand, okay, I see a clear argument. They didn't make it, as I read, World War I started because of many events, and those many events led to World War I. That thesis really doesn't say anything. But the thesis that I outlined here about Ferdinand, about the assassination of Ferdinand, set in motion secret treaties, that right there seems to be a clear thesis that has, could be supported. And it has some clear focus. I'm just looking at this one particular assassination. So let's go back to my sources. So if I use the assassination of Ferdinand, I'm going to put assassination of Ferdinand. Let's just say this first source used was about Russia mobilizing her forces. So I would say that's a 2 because there's no clear support. Like I have to see a clear connection between the source and the thesis. At that point, I don't necessarily know how you are going to analyze that source in relation to your thesis. So that could be problematic. Let's just say I score the student here. That would be in the middle. Sometimes I go in the middle, 1.5. Let's say here now the second source clearly addressed the assassination, but their analysis was somewhere in the middle. That means they're here at that particular deduction of 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, I want to also point out here that when I'm done reading the essay, this is where this information comes in. So in my previous example, I was suggesting that the student had a poor source choice and it scored a -2, but they did have some analysis of that source. Well, if you're wondering, well, I could just have sources and just analyze it any way I want, that's not going to work because you have to convince me through your writing. So this would be a -3 deduction. So let's go back to those sources. This source didn't support the thesis. And now we're getting to the point where I'm looking at the analysis. And so they have good analysis, which led to a 0 of that source, but that source didn't clearly support the thesis. So you're probably going to have an issue here, and you're probably going to have an issue here with clear message as well as clear, concise argument. You might also get a deduction right here because I have to figure out as the reader how your sources and analysis all connect to the thesis. So in that scenario, you have a -2 for the source, but you had good analysis. But I'm also going to ding you down here collectively for this essay. So that would be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So for the most part, what I want you focusing on here, have a clear thesis that supports, that hits the requirement. One argument, 2 points, 3, depending on how many paragraphs are assigned. We have our thesis sentence here. And make sure in your essay body, you have 3 sources. and all three sources clearly link to the thesis. In your thesis, if you tell me you are writing about cats and source one is about dogs, I will have a problem. You are going to get a -2. Telling me you're writing about cats, thesis is okay. The second and third source are about cats. I could see a clear connection. Maybe I score you over here for each source. But your analysis right here is 1. We could start to see how the deductions are going to pile up. And also keep in mind, when we get to some of the other rubrics, the second paragraph added, you're going to now have this section, and you're going to have another section here. What I mean by that is, when you go down to the second market period, this is taking place per paragraph per source. So now I'm looking at 6 cited sources and 6 sections of analysis. So it is possible, if all of your sources do not match in future essays. Here, I'll just go all 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That right there is a -24. And you better hope that your thesis is there, that your flow, I'm looking to see your transitions. What do I mean by transitions? How you end this one paragraph. Do you just jump right into your next issue? What is the transition like? You need to look at some of the samples that are posted on the class website. I'll be addressing that later on anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Writing tips. There is a file titled Writing Tips, and the writing tips tell you a lot of additional information. Do not cite encyclopedias. Do not ask questions in the essay. Going off topic, avoiding throughout history. All of these are additional deductions. So if you're struggling in those areas, when you look at this page here, you're going to see some deductions. The format. Do you use the footnotes? Do you have the bibliography? Do you have all of the formatting issues correct? If you don't, that'll be a -2. Closing, unless we're using a closing, so not applicable. Introduction of sources. You need to introduce your sources. If the author is Johnson, you want to say, according to Johnson, in his piece, I don't know the name of his piece, I don't know, we'll call it T. That's the name of his article, T. I want to see introduction. Then I want to see the section of this work that you're citing, and then I want to see your analysis. When you're introducing your sources, you could use according to, you could say in the article T, you could write stuff like that. Make sure when you're using quotes, some students will give me the name of the article in quotes, but then they go back to quoting the article. A way to avoid this, instead of using this method, give me italics for the name of the article. T. According to Johnson in T, now you could give me your quotes and give me exactly what he is, the section that you're citing. We also want to be mindful of these deductions here. We want to avoid writing lengthy summaries. If you're writing about World War I starting, I really don't want to know all of these specifics. In my example before, I placed all of the blame on Ferdinand. If your essay talks about all of the other causes of World War I don't care. I only care about you citing and writing about Ferdinand. Why? Because that's what you told me in your thesis. If you're giving me Ferdinand, let's say you have, 18 sentences, and out of those 18 sentences, you gave me 10 that act like a summary, read like a summary. Well, you still have to introduce your source, you still have to cite your source. That would tell me that out of your 18 sentences, only 10 of them are really about a summary, and they read like a Wikipedia article. You don't want to write like this is a Wikipedia summary. You need to write about Ferdinand. I need to see source 1, your analysis of source 1, source 2, your analysis of source 2, source 3, your analysis of source 3. And all of them have to link back to Ferdinand. Why? Because you told me that was in your thesis. If you are not using that method, you will receive deductions in these areas. Paper is not brief. Instead has numerous references that restrict clarity. Does not reference prior paragraphs and thesis points throughout essay body. So what do I mean by a clear message? You give me your source about Ferdinand, source 1, source 2, and source 3. You should be referring back to the thesis, even if you're doing this directly. What I mean by that is, you say, whatever issue is in this right here, the assassination of Ferdinand by the Black Hand, that was something that led to World War I. Why? You need to go back to that particular thesis. So those are the deductions. We want to make sure that you convince the reader by the end, after I'm done reading all of your sources and your analysis. I should be able to, in my head, answer this question. Am I convinced about the thesis? Yes or no? If I'm not, that's a -3. It's not historic. What I mean by that is this is reading like an op-ed. You are making assumptions. You are presenting information without any clear evidence, any clear data. If it's not historic, you will get a deduction here. Too much filler information. You know you have to have a requirement of X amount of sentences, yet you feel the need to write all of these summaries about all of these details that are not about this topic. You're writing too much filler information, and it seems to be done for adding paragraph length. I'm not looking for that. Last thing I want to mention, as you go through the year, you will see that the rubric starts to change. And again, starts to change because you start to see more paragraphs being added. In this case, 3, as I mentioned before. But we will get there. We are first starting out with 1 paragraph. And that 1 paragraph, will have 3 supporting sources that clearly support the thesis. Keep in mind, you can cite more than 3. Let's say student cites 5 sources, and out of those 5 sources, only these 3 clearly support the argument about Ferdinand causing World War I. Well, that's fine, because I'll be looking at these sources. I am aware that these sources are here, but now I need to figure out of these 5 sources, which 3 best support the thesis that the students set out to support. That's it.